The real threat to our league isn't money, it isn't ratings, or even missed calls, or even physical play. It's the lack of accountability from the league office.
Okay, so the real issue in the WNBA isn't about money, or ratings, or even a bad call here and there. It's actually the league office not being accountable. Think about Sue Bird in that moment after Napheesa Collier's super emotional press conference. Cameras caught Sue's face, and she was just stunned. Like totally disbelief mixed with disappointment. Some people are saying it was about loyalty, but others are whispering it's something way deeper. Maybe a big rift nobody saw coming. Her teammates looked totally uneasy, and fans were just confused, feeling that tension ripple through the whole league. So what on earth could make one of basketball's calmest legends react like that? It felt like something really important between them just broke. Get ready, because Sue Bird is watching a new leader emerge. Sue Bird just sat there quietly while the cameras were rolling. Her eyes were totally glued to every word Napheesa Collier said. This wasn't just some regular media thing. It felt like a huge turning point for the league. And for Bird, who's one of the most respected voices in women's basketball, this moment actually hit her emotionally in a way she didn't expect. She's seen so many stars come and go, but there was just something about Collier's presence, her voice, her quiet strength, that felt like a real shift in the whole WNBA vibe. So, Napheesa Collier, the superstar for the Minnesota Lynx and one of the league's brightest young talents, was talking about what it means to lead. She spoke about stepping into this huge role after all those veteran players who basically built the team had left. But get this, she sounded so calm, way beyond her years. She was honest, but also super composed. It wasn't some fake, rehearsed speech, you know? Every single sentence was deliberate, grounded, and just totally sincere. And as Bird listened, she realized this was something you can't teach. This was the natural command of a real leader. Now Bird, who's famously calm on and off the court herself, later thought back about how Collier handled that whole situation. It wasn't just what Collier said that impressed her, but how she said it. Her confidence wasn't showy or loud. It was just steady, like a strong heartbeat even under all that pressure. It totally reminded Bird of all those times she stood at a microphone, knowing that one sentence could change everything. It could create headlines, shift public opinion, or even define a whole season. For Bird, a press conference isn't just a formality. It really shows how an athlete sees themselves and their role in the sport. She understood the quiet power in those moments, how the right tone and expression can truly connect a player to their fans and the wider basketball world. Watching Collier, Bird saw someone who just got that balance, authentic yet composed, relatable but still authoritative. It was the kind of performance that earned respect through truth, not just flashiness. And get this, Collier didn't even flinch from tough questions. When people asked about leading a young team or dealing with the pressure of being a franchise player, she answered with total clarity and conviction. Her words showed she knew herself well, but also had a clear vision for the future of women's basketball. The exact future Bird spent decades fighting for. So, for Bird, this wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. That calm strength, staying composed under intense scrutiny, refusing to let the moment get to her. Those were traits Bird relied on for her entire 20-year career. And watching Collier show them off with such natural grace, Bird felt both proud and a little bittersweet. It was like a quiet passing of the torch, a legend seeing the next guardian of the game rise up. Sue Bird's reaction wasn't about being jealous or just nostalgic. It was about seeing something sacred continue. It was a reminder that greatness in basketball isn't just about points or championships. It's about the courage to lead, to speak up, and to inspire the next generation. As those cameras clicked and Collier's words echoed, Bird knew one thing for sure. The WNBA's future had just found its next voice. But here's the thing. Did Sue Bird see a passing of the torch or the start of a storm? Keep watching. Sue Bird had seen everything in her career. All the wins, the tough losses, those big moments that tested a player's heart. Not just their skill, but listening to Napheesa Collier talk about what happened after Game 3. Bird felt like something much deeper was going on than just regular post-game talk. This wasn't about one night or a bad call. It was about this underlying current that's always been in the WNBA, full of frustration and serious determination. For Bird, Collier's comments just confirmed a truth she totally understood. That moment might have started with the heat of the game, but the conversation went way past that. What happened in Game 3, Bird thought was just a little spark in a much longer story. A story that's been building for years, about fighting for recognition, fair treatment, and respect for all these women who've given their lives to this game. The issue didn't start that night, it was just finally dragged out into the open. Now, Bird is in this unique spot as part of team ownership, so she had to be super careful with her words. There were definitely limits to what she could say publicly, and boundaries she totally respected, but what she could talk about was history, and she knew that spoke volumes. Look, time and again, when WNBA players have actually used their voices, real change has happened. It's never been easy, and it's honestly frustrating that progress so often relies on players having to shout first, to demand attention before anything gets done, but still, it gets results. What really got to Bird was how often people just misunderstood this whole situation. She felt like too many still looked at women's basketball through the lens of men's sports, assuming they had the same structures, the same privileges, the same support systems. But that's just not the reality, right? The WNBA has always had to fight way harder for the same respect, the same recognition, and just basic fairness. And when the people in charge didn't listen quietly, the players learned to speak up so loudly they couldn't be ignored. Social media really changed the game, Bird noticed. It gave players instant access to their fans and the freedom to just say what's real without any filters. But she also saw a big difference between just venting online and making a thoughtful, prepared statement that really has weight. She believed that was something uniquely powerful about the women in her league. This ability to take all that emotion and turn it into organized, purposeful advocacy. She remembered how many times players tried to talk about their concerns privately, only to be brushed off or delayed. Eventually, they figured out that sometimes the public stage was the only place that made the league actually pay attention. And for Bird, that wasn't rebellion. That was just demanding accountability. Listen, one moment from the season really stuck with her. It wasn't from Collier, but from Paige Bueckers, this young guard who's wise beyond her years. Before a game in Indiana, Paige told her teammates something that really resonated with Bird. She said, "I've had to learn how to defend while fouling again." She said it kinda jokingly, but underneath that humor was this deep exhaustion. It was a quiet nod to all the inconsistencies, the unspoken struggles players go through just to adapt. For Bird, that just crystallized everything: the frustration, the resilience, the never-ending effort to be heard. The WNBA isn't just a league, it's a movement built on sheer persistence. And as she watched this new generation speak out with the same courage she once had, Bird realized the cycle wasn't ending, it was just evolving. The torch had truly been passed, and with it, the responsibility to keep pushing until real, lasting change finally takes hold. What's more, what happens when the fight for fairness gets bigger than just the court itself? When it forces legends and newcomers to rethink what justice actually means. Stay tuned. Sue Bird had heard so many post-game reflections in her career, but Paige Bueckers' words, they really stuck with her. Before a game in Indiana, this young star just spoke openly about how her defensive mindset had totally changed since college. In school, she said, it was all about defending without fouling, precision, restraint, control. But in the WNBA, she realized something completely different. To survive in this league, she had to learn how to defend while fouling. Pretty wild, right? Bird didn't hear any bitterness in Paige's voice, just pure honesty. There was no hidden agenda, no trying to stir up drama. Paige was just describing a reality that every player recognized, but not many were willing to say out loud. And what's crazy is, Bird used to joke that she played in the 90s NBA herself. That was her way of explaining the sheer physicality of her era, back when elbows were flying and bodies were colliding like crazy under the basket. The game's definitely evolved since then, but Bird totally understood what Paige meant. Every generation really does learn its own way to survive in this league. But here's the thing, Bird wasn't trying to blame anyone, she had zero interest in making officials the scapegoats. In fact, she often felt really bad for them. Their job, she knew, is genuinely one of the toughest in sports. Think about it. Split-second decisions, constant pressure, endless scrutiny. Every single whistle echoes even louder now, because every mistake gets replayed, picked apart, and magnified all over social media. She really felt like that growing negativity had unfairly landed on their shoulders. So, as Bird saw it, the problem wasn't actually about individual referees, it was totally systemic. What's crazy is that almost every team, players and coaches alike, were seeing the exact same inconsistencies. The same confusion about how physical play was getting judged. The frustration wasn't just about one call or one game, it was about a much bigger pattern that was actively changing how the sport felt to play. Bird truly believed there was this simple but super important step that could start to fix things. Acknowledgement. Not silence, not getting defensive, just the willingness of those in power to actually say, "Hey, we hear you." Whether that came from the commissioner's office, the officiating department, or the competition committee, a public statement recognizing the players' concerns would go a long way, because underneath all that frustration was just a basic human need to be heard. Bird knew that even if the league was already working on these issues behind the scenes, saying so openly would have made a huge difference. Transparency, she thought, is a form of respect. It shows players that their experiences aren't being dismissed and their struggles aren't invisible. So, as she thought about everything, Collier's comments, Becker's honesty, all those conversations echoing through locker rooms, Bird realized the real heart of the issue wasn't about officiating at all. It was about connection, communication, and trust between the players and the people running the game. And as someone who spent decades watching the WNBA fight for its own recognition, she knew this was another one of those moments that would test how much the league really listens when its players speak. What's crazy is, how did a simple debate about whistles and fouls turn into this much deeper question about power, trust, and who actually controls the game? Stay tuned. So, we're talking whistles and boundaries here, and how those rules totally shape the game. Sue Bird leaned back, thinking about how many times she'd seen just one whistle change the whole rhythm of a game, or even a season, or a career. For her, talking about officiating wasn't some abstract idea. It was something she'd lived, felt, and constantly adjusted to over decades of playing professionally. And when the conversation came back to Paige Buckers and how players have to adapt defensively, Bird really wanted to talk about something deeper. How refereeing itself shapes not just games, but playing styles, instincts, and even confidence. She remembered it so clearly, the US women's national team actually did a college tour right before the whole world shut down, back in late 20. Those exhibition games against top college programs were supposed to get Team USA ready for international play, but they brought some unexpected challenges too. Everyone still talks about that loss to Oregon, though Bird would rather not dwell on that one right now. What was more important, though, was what those games really showed. So, in those matchups, USA Basketball agreed to play under college rules, with college referees. Now, on paper, that doesn't sound like a huge deal, right? But in reality, it totally changed the leal of the game. Bird and her teammates, who are some of the best, most experienced players on the planet, suddenly had to unlearn habits they'd used their entire careers. They couldn't hand check, couldn't initiate contact the same way. They had to move, defend, and react completely differently, because the officials were calling the game with an entirely different philosophy. Wild. Bird totally remembered the frustration that came with that adjustment. What's crazy is that the same refs, sometimes even the exact same people, could call a WNBA game one way and a college game another. For her, that was the clearest proof that officiating isn't some fixed thing. It's flexible. Referees follow the tone set by the people above them, the powers that be. The standard can totally shift, and players just have no choice but to follow. For Bird, that realization held a powerful truth. If the officiating culture could change from one setting to another, it could definitely change within the WNBA too. It wasn't about blaming officials, it was about recognizing their influence and the structure guiding them. Players, she often said, will play how refs allow them to play. If physical play is okay, athletes adapt. If every little touch is a foul, they'll adjust to that too. The referees, in a really big way, define the boundaries of the game. She actually spoke with genuine empathy for the officials. Bird knew their job is just grueling, split-second calls, constant pressure, every single decision filmed, slowed down, and scrutinized. She definitely didn't envy them. But she also knew that their approach could totally shape outcomes in ways that go way beyond just the scoreboard. That's what really fascinated her. The system could evolve. It already had. Across different leagues and levels, change didn't need to happen instantly. But it was possible, and in her opinion, necessary. Because when players like Collier or Buckers found themselves adjusting, not to strategy but to inconsistency, the game itself actually suffered. Bird wondered aloud what even one small, deliberate adjustment could look like if it were applied in the finals. Could just one consistent standard, one cleaned-up area of officiating, restore some balance? She didn't have an easy answer, but she knew this much. Basketball's fairness, its flow, and its beauty depended just as much on the rules that governed it as on the players who lived by them. And as her words hung in the air, one question really stuck. Could the game's chaos truly be fixed, or had fairness already slipped too far away? Stay tuned. So, this is about a game caught in a grip. From Sue Bird's perspective, this whole conversation wasn't just about one play or one night of bad officiating. It was about the actual heartbeat the game itself. Watching from the sidelines, she could feel it. This tension between freedom and restraint, between showing off skill and being suppressed. There was just something off about the WNBA's rhythm lately. Something that didn't feel right to her experienced eye. She'd seen it so many times. Players struggling, not because of bad form, but because they were being physically held, grabbed, or blocked off the ball in ways that just choked their movement and totally broke the natural flow of the game. Two hands, she thought. Two hands, stopping brilliance. It wasn't just rough defense, you know? It was actively interfering with the artistry that makes this sport so beautiful. Sue knew she wasn't the only one feeling this frustration. Becky Hammon had actually said similar things, echoing what so many veterans felt but rarely spoke about. But now, with Caitlyn Clark showing up, those frustrations were suddenly magnified for everyone to see. It's almost weird Caitlyn became this mirror, reflecting every flaw, every overlooked habit that the league had just kinda tolerated for years. Fans who were just discovering the WNBA were starting to ask the exact same questions Sue had been asking for decades. They'd watch, wide-eyed and puzzled, like, wait, how is that not a foul? The more they looked, the more they noticed. All these moments that should have been fluid, skillful plays were getting broken up by grabs, bumps, and grips that officials just weren't seeing. For Sue, this wasn't about favoritism or changing the rules. It was all about integrity. The league simply couldn't showcase its best talent if its stars weren't free to move, to play, to create. She believed the conversation had to start with freedom of movement. But it couldn't stop there. The real challenge was much deeper. How could the WNBA actually invest in developing the best officials on the planet? How could they make sure that every whistle, every call, reflected not just consistency, but a true respect for the game's evolving brilliance? For Sue Bird, it wasn't just about what was happening on the court. It was about what kind of league the WNBA truly wanted to become. And underneath her calm voice, there was this growing urgency. If the game didn't adapt soon, the cost wouldn't just be unfair play. It could be the erosion of its very soul. Seriously, how can a league truly thrive if its brightest stars are basically held back by bad officiating? What kind of future does that create? This is really about the cost of losing control. According to Sue Bird, the issue isn't just about physical contact on the court anymore. It's become this huge question about what kind of future the WNBA is actually building for itself. She could totally see the cracks forming, and it wasn't because the refs weren't skilled. It was because of the system governing them. Some nights, the game would just turn into a wrestling match, and then on other nights, it would flow freely with a tighter whistle. That inconsistency really bothered her, not because she doubted the refs' abilities, but because she knew they were capable of so much more. What really unsettled her was realizing that a lot of these same officials work at both the college and professional levels. In college, they enforce stricter standards, call fouls that keep the game flowing, and let Lear really show off their talent. But in the WNBA, those same exact referees often seem bound by totally different instructions, different mandates. So it's not about their skill, It's about what the league allows, what it prioritizes, and what it chooses to just overlook. And then there was the elephant in the room, the problem no one really wanted to say out loud. But every veteran player had seen it. The league's best referees, they never stick around for long. They get snatched up by the NBA, drawn by bigger paychecks. In those higher-profile games, the talent pipeline isn't broken, it's totally drained. Siphoned away by a system that puts women's sports second, not first. It's frustrating. For Sue, that was a pretty bitter truth. Something she'd seen happen not just with officiating, but literally everywhere. Think about it. Trainers, marketing experts, PR specialists, even broadcasters. Women's leagues develop all this amazing talent, only to lose them to the men's side when the money starts calling. That cycle, she totally believed, wasn't just unfair, it was unsustainable. How can the WNBA ever really reach its full potential if every investment in excellence eventually gets handed off to someone else? So the question wasn't just about getting better rules or stricter whistles. It was about building a whole structure that truly valued and kept the best talent, from the players on the court to the people in the front office. Sue knew that pointing out problems is always easier than fixing them. She totally admitted that herself. But she also believed that real progress demands facing those uncomfortable truths. Freedom of movement, consistency in officiating, and most importantly, a commitment to keeping the brightest talent within the women's game. Otherwise, the league risks not just losing control of its flow, but losing control of its entire future. So what do you think? Can the WNBA actually break free from all this inconsistent officiating and losing its best talent? Or will history just keep repeating itself?